Okay. You hear that voice.
Oh, perfect.
And it tells you every time you join as well. It's like if you were to leave this and come back, you would just hear a voice. This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, that's sick. Damn, WebEx has it all then. Damn, okay, fair enough. Um, all right. Welcome everyone to this another episode of The Intern. Today I have a very special guest, someone I've been trying to get hold of, but not the best. Don't have the best calendars with each other. But luckily enough, we finally have him, and his name is Michael Francis. Michael, if you could give like a brief introduction about yourself, that would be amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much. So, hello everyone. My headphones make my face look a little weird, but I am, Michael Francis. I am currently a software developer at IBM. I graduated from McMaster University with a degree in mathematical science about a year ago now, since it is May, so a year ago, back in 2022. But I've been at IBM on and off since 2018 because I've done about 5 internships there, and I'm currently on a full-time position and actually joining a new team at the end of next week. So I'm kind of all over the place at IBM, balancing that in school. I've done many internships there, and now I'm a full-time developer. And that's like the very quick summary of me.
But you also forgot you're also a keynote speaker.
Yes, that is something. I've done quite a few keynotes for IBM actually, and for both internal and external. So especially gearing around interns, whether we're talking about the intern experience externally or welcoming new interns internally. There's a lot of major events that I've done. Basically, I've either emceed or hosted or done a keynote for IBM, and I've also done some outside of IBM as well. Specifically, I know there was Delta Hacks at McMaster, and there was another hackathon at Sheridan, and so yeah, I do keynotes every now and then from time to time.
And for those who haven't seen his presentations, I must say you do know how to cheer a crowd. Like it was pretty entertaining.
Thank you very
Um,
much. I appreciate that.
so because you obviously are now full time and you were a student previously, like what do you really do in your free time? Like when you have free time?
My free time is very much all over the place, I will say. There was a very long period of time where like any free moment I would get, I would just like play video games. Specifically
Fair.
PC games, like Call of Duty is the classic one, Dead by Daylight, so on and so forth. Um, I would say nowadays what I'm trying to do with my free time is sort of focus on more of it on experience. One thing I will say, um, for anyone that, let's say, has never done an internship, or maybe you've done an internship, you might already know this, is like the work life is so different from the school life. School life, you sort of never catch a break. There's always the next midterm, especially for engineering. You have 2 midterms in your exam. There's always the next thing going on, the next assignment. And while work definitely has that, um, it doesn't feel as so hectic, I would say. Like work is so much easier to me, in my opinion, than school. And so when you have free time as a full-time employee, it feels very different because let's say as a student, and you have your summer vacation, your summer is only like 4 months, and so you got to start thinking,
Yeah.
okay, I got to plan my courses for next year, I got to whatever the case. But when you don't have school, your free time really is completely free, and you can sort of detach it from work. So some of the things I've been doing, for example, is like planning trips, planning events, going to concerts, and like things. I've gone to Montreal just on a random, let's get on a train and go to Montreal kind of thing. I have a friend who just flew on a plane to Vancouver. And
Fair.
so like what I've been trying to do with my free time since, let's say, the start of this year, since I realized like free time feels so much differently when you graduate, is I've been trying to like essentially plan experiences. Like I'm saying, okay, maybe I want to go to Europe next year, or maybe I want to, whatever the case, things like that, and really start to plan out these long-term things that you want to do, because you don't so university makes you feel so short-sighted in the sense that you got to worry about the thing that's happening next week or next month or whatever, when
Yeah,
I
okay.
really could put away money all year and then next year go travel somewhere, right? And so I have to start thinking about that. And then every now and then as well, I do a little coding, or teach people some coding and things like that.
Fair. Yeah, so I kind of want you to elaborate on like the how you mentioned like university makes you like short-sighted because I do agree like in university especially like you feel like there's so much on your hand like you kind of you don't look at long term, you look at more short term and like you're always worrying about the next thing. So could you just elaborate more on like because especially masters, really famous for life science students or anyone who's trying to med school, and these people are always studying for like a long period of time, right? And because you didn't do a master's, right? I'm just
No, no.
so you went right after. Okay, so yeah. So just elaborate just like what's your thought on people who do their masters and stuff? Like would you recommend people to just like experience the world and like like yeah, explain kind of that like when you're in like a work environment, you said that now instead of focusing on the like an assessment or something, you're always worried you want to have experiences and just yeah, like elaborate on like the importance of that experience wise and like understanding what the world really is or like what the life's really about.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say graduate school is so much different than undergraduate school. And people who go on to do the masters will tell you like it's not really like your undergrad. Like you especially if you do a research masters, like you'll have a couple of courses, sure. But a masters is so much different than the undergrad because it's not this heavy, consistent push of you have the next class and taking six courses in one term or
Yeah.
for 4 years kind of thing. And it's not to say that people shouldn't do a master's. It's always about sort of what you want to get out of it. I know, for example, like I'm on a compiler team right now, and the newest hire, let's say, like the last person to join that team before I did, they joined after completing a master's in compilers, right? So they obviously have this vast compiler knowledge just getting into the team versus anyone who does like computer science will tell you like you don't really cover compilers in the curriculum, and even the compiler courses that are usually taught, while they are useful, don't really get into the big ideas that are important in compilers today, like LLVM and so on. So in terms of like what is the life really like, I guess once you graduate and you're like, or maybe you're on an internship, it really is that you can look at things in a short term. Like, yeah, I have this item I'm working on that needs to be finished. Yeah, we're planning whatever the case. But outside of the work that you do, you realize you have all this free time and you have all this long term planning that you could do. Random things like, hey, maybe I want to buy a house one day. I should maybe save for that, or whatever the case. Versus school, you can think about how you have all these different classes, five or six different classes, and each individually take up so much of your time that you can't really say this is my school stuff and this is separate, right? Sometimes you have an exam on a Saturday, right? And
Yeah.
you have assignment for this class due Wednesday and assignment for that class due Friday, and then right, so it never ends because you can't really group school that way. Versus work is kind of like just having one course, or
Yeah.
two, like not necessarily from a workload perspective, that kind of varies. But the idea is that if you were only taking one course, you could put that course aside and say, what other things are happening in my life? What other things do I want to be able to do outside of this one course that I'm taking? But when are a full time student, you don't have that one course. You have five, six. I even did seven one time, right? And work is very much that way, where it's like it's not to say that it's as easy as taking one course, but it really is only just a section of your life, right? And so you have to decide, what do you want to do with that other free time. Do you want to pick up more work, because that's very much an option, or do you say, some people, they say like, I don't really like writing code, I just do it for work. So they will write code for the work that they need to do, and then take all the other time in their day or their week or whatever to like go hiking, go fishing, whatever the case. Some people like coding just in general, so they will code for work, and as soon as they finish coding what they need to code, they will go home and just write more code and learn about different programming languages and different frameworks and whatever the case. And so where a university will kind of force you into, everything you do has to be circulated around your degree. In the workplace, while work is of course very important, this is your career, this is a long-term thing you will be doing. It's not, it doesn't take up as big of a space in your life as you necessarily let it be. For example, like vacations, you can't really just go to your profs and say, hey, I'm going to be taking 2 or 3 weeks to go do XYZ. It's like that time you miss, you still got to be submitting those assignments, for whatever reason. And on the other hand, I'm planning a vacation with my family in July, for example. So no matter what's happening on my team in July, I know I have to stop what I'm doing and go on vacation, kind of thing. And so being able to plan what is my life outside of work, as opposed to like when you're in school, it's very tricky to do because everything you do is around the fact that you have school. Like, no, I can't hang out on Friday. I have to study for this, or I gotta, right? You have to take this exam or write this assignment or whatever the case. So everything you do as a student is like working around the fact that you are a student versus, especially when you work a career sort of 9 to 5, where your schedule is consistent, it doesn't feel as much that way where it's like I have to work around the fact that on Thursday night I need to do this for my boss who's doing that, and you don't get that, right? Because it's very much 9 to 5, and even then that's relaxed. Sometimes you finish at 3 or whatever the case. So it's very much, if I want to do something, I'm not being held back by all these things that are happening. I can just do it.
That's fair. Um, the way you describe it, I'm guessing that would you say you enjoy more of like the work life because you
Absolutely.
have. So now I want to ask, especially someone who is in the software field, compared to someone in like the medicine or like the law field where education is very important. In the software field, there is a lot of people who are self-taught programmers, and they don't necessarily have a degree in that field. So, would you say that school is like if you were able to go back in time and redo your career, would you say you would focus more on just teaching yourself and like learning,
Yes.
like outsourcing, and not go to school and just
I will
learn?
I will jump in there. I wouldn't necessarily say don't go to school, because the school environment is very useful for a lot of people. A lot of people prefer structured learning. One of the problems of self-taught is you need to be disciplined enough and also, let's say, like a little enjoy a little less structure in general to be able to learn the things that you want to learn. But it can be very difficult to know what do I need to learn next. Like you might say, okay, I want to write video games, and okay, we'll learn C++. Well, how do you know when you've learned enough C++? When
No,
can I
fair.
start learning how to use Unity? Okay, when I use Unity, what do I need to learn about in Unity? You can spend a lot of time doing modeling in Blender, but if you want to, develop the logic in your video games, Blender isn't really going to help you. But if you wanted to do UI, that would be so. So there's a whole thing with self-taught where it's not really as glamorous as people think it is because you really have to have this understanding of where do I need to go next and understanding where do you want to be. There's a lot of software developers, a lot of students in third year, fourth year who say, they ask me, they say, what kind of development do I want to do when I graduate? Right? They say, like, hey, I'm a third year, I'm a fourth year, and there's all these different things you can do. You can do front end, you can do back end, you can do compilers, you can do web applications, you can do iOS. What do I do? Right? And that's not a simple thing. If you know what you want to do, if you know you want to make Android apps, it's very easy to teach yourself how to make Android apps. But a lot of people don't know what they want to do. And even if you do know what you want to do, it's not always necessarily easy to go out and do that. So university in college in general is very good at structuring the learning because when you enroll in a class, you don't get to decide what gets covered. The prof says, this is what we're going to learn. These are the weeks we're going to learn it. Here's the assignment to make sure you're on track. Here's what's on the exam, right? So it very much structures what it is you're learning. The problem I have with university is that it's way too theoretical, and you learn in the sense that you get practice with problem solving and writing code and doing all these things, which is the most important part about learning software overall. But you're missing on a lot of the practical effects that come with working on the job. One example I've brought up recently is, it's really popular to have certain build tools like Jenkins or BuildBot, which are these sort of frameworks, these APIs that allow you to create this pipeline design. Basically, imagine like a bot that, if you have a product, you have a bot that's like always building your product in the background and always running
Okay.
tests in the background. And as soon as it runs a test and it fails, it comes back to you and say, hey, this test case is failing. We need to fix that. So imagine, instead of manually every time you change, you update, you add a feature, you fix a bug, you have a bot that automatically takes your changes and tries to build your product with it. And if it fails, it'll let you know. Or if it passes, but it fails a test case, it'll let you know, and things like that. So that's a really popular kind tool. This is called CI, continuous integration tool, that is used in the workplace. But there's no reason a student working in any of these classes would have any kind of experience with that, right? There's no reason that you in your course, and even if it's a group project and you're doing like the machine learning class, that you would be able to spin up an AWS instance or some IBM cloud instance and then start paying for the time on that and build up a Jenkins or a build bot infrastructure to automatically run tests, and you have it in parallel for different versions of your product. And that's not the kind of thing that you do, right? And so there are a lot of things that you might encounter in the workplace that you simply just can't get experience for because of the nature of how school works. But also there are things that you can get experience for that I don't think universities are doing a good job of covering. um, One example, as I mentioned a little earlier, was with compilers, and taking a compiler course. So the thing about taking a compiler course at university is, again, like, it's not to say you shouldn't do it, but it'll cover very low level, like, okay, here's how you might parse the syntax and things like that. But you never get into the things that are actually used for compilers today. You get into, like, if you were to build a compiler 40 years ago, here's how you would do it. But any modern compiler today, I should say most modern compilers today, use LLVM technology, right? LLVM backend and LLVM project overall, but you can take a compiler course and never once cover LLVM. But that's pretty important, because if you get a job in compilers, more often than not, you're going to be working with LLVM. So what is LLVM, right? All these kind of things should be
Yeah.
answered in that kind of class. And that's my overall problem. And I can give a million examples, because I know I'm kind of ranting here. But my overall problem with university for something like software is that I think it's too theoretical for most people. If you want to get into masters and PhD, you want to be on the cutting edge, then absolutely you can do that. But I find that a lot of the courses I took were way too theoretical in terms of aligning what I wanted to take the course to learn and what I actually learned. A good example, just to compare university in particular, actually, because I don't have any of these problems with colleges, is I took the database course. And I the reason I took it was, I said, okay, at the time I was doing an internship that dealt with IBM DB2, it's a database. And I said, okay, I'll learn about different types of databases. There's a transactional database. I'll learn SQL. I'll learn all these cool things. And of these 7 assignments, one and a half of them were SQL related. And I say half because, like, half of the questions were SQL for that assignment, the other half weren't. And then there's a good chunk of the course that was covered, like, functional mathematics and things like that. And it's like, this is all really cool theory if there was a zombie apocalypse tomorrow and we needed to rewrite databases from scratch. But I find it very interesting that I take a course on databases and you don't cover, for example, how might you connect to a database in some generic, I don't know, pick one, MongoDB, it doesn't matter. How might you, like, what's, the best way to set up a database infrastructure? How should I lay out the data depending on the kind of things that I'm going to be doing with my data? Like all these kind of things that are important for practically actually using a database in your day-to-day workplace, as opposed to learning the theory behind how databases work. And that's sort of the trick about college versus university. It's not to say that the theory isn't important, but if you spend 4 years doing all the theory and it's like, yeah, I know the theory behind a database, that's cool, but you can't work with them because you don't really know how to interact with them. You just know that mathematically speaking, they can exist. and a good example, the last thing I'll say on this one is, as you can tell, I'm like really eager about this topic. I
I
have a
love it though. I
friend.
love it.
I have a friend who is doing a civil engineering diploma at Humber, and I remember when he was so. If you've done like software engineering or just any engineering, for example, in a university setting, you've taken linear algebra in your first year. You cover row echelon form, matrix multiplication. You've covered. Let's talk about cofactors for finding determinants of n by n matrix greater than 3. You've talked about the identity matrix, determinants. You've covered all this kind of stuff. And this guy is a third year in civil engineering diploma, right, in college. And he was asking me, he's like, how do you add and subtract matrices? And that's the furthest extent we'll ever go with it. Like, the class doesn't cover anything else. It's just sometimes you need to add two matrices, sometimes you need to subtract them, right? And that's a highlight of just the difference between college and universities. College is really preparing you to do the job, right? That's what their focus is you don't need to know how to find the cofactors of a 10 by 10 matrix to do civil engineering, right? But in university, that's a first year topic, right? And that's just one of the many different first year topics that I covered. And so my thing about, would I go back in time, and would I, not get the education through traditional means, let's say, and self teach. I think it very much depends on what you want to do, but overall, I would still say aim for going to university or college to have that structured learning, because a lot of people, I feel, are a little bit overconfident in their ability to self learn, and just because you're self learning doesn't mean you're learning the right things. Not only could you be learning things that are irrelevant to your main goal, but you could be learning things the incorrect or not necessarily the best way. Because at the end of the day, the biggest teacher you will have is doing the work on the job. There's not enough university or college or online courses that you can do that will teach you any better than actually doing the work on a team, right? And so at the end of the day, you just want to cover the basics, in the sense of you want to get that practice of being able to build programs, understanding, different programming languages, for example, and having that base knowledge. And that base knowledge isn't measured by, hey, I can do recursion in classes. That base knowledge is measured by your ability to solve problems, which some people is really easy to do. Some people need a lot more practice, but everyone can get there. And that's really what it is, in terms of my thought process behind the education system with computer science, software engineering, is at the end of the day, the vast majority of the knowledge you gain will happen over the course of your career. So it's not to say people who self learn are stupid, or people who, go to school are like super intelligent. It really just boils down to whatever means you can to get your first job. If you think
That's
you can more easily secure a job in 4 years by going to university and having a degree so that employers can see that paper, do it. If you think that you would be so much better in getting a job if you took 4 or 3 or 2 years just self learning or going through a boot camp or whatever the case, do it. Because that first job is where you're going to learn 95% of the things that 2 years down the road.
that's a really good point. I guess you're the perfect person to ask this because now I've seen a lot of my friends who chosen different career paths, like whether it's in the sciences or law, like I mentioned. Um, they obviously know that just because like we're in a world like a digital age where even AI is like the new big the big topic, everyone's slowly trying to integrate their lifestyle into software. Like they're trying to learn something, whatever they can, right? So I guess I want to ask you, like, say if you were in their position, right? Obviously because they're not even in that program, they can't really take a course, or they could obviously take an elective. What is your best recommendation? Like, should they just hop right into the tutorials you can find on YouTube, jump into like a boot camp, jump into some online what's it called online courses you can take? There's so many options now, but from your perspective as someone who believes that experience is is probably the most necessary thing, what is something you recommend to them? And if you were into their position, what was something you would do?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I sort of had a discussion about before is like, what is sort of the best programming language to learn as like as a beginner? Like, as a beginner, what is the best language that people should cover? And one of the things I basically concluded from that sort of debate that I would have with a friend was it very much depends on what you plan on doing with it. So if you plan on being a developer, like you say, maybe you are in law and you don't want to do law anymore, and you say, I want to write code and do AI work for a living, then having that formalized, structured education, I think, is really good. If you, for example, I know my brother had asked me one time, is like, I just want to learn Python for the sake of knowing Python. Um, then yeah, any online YouTube tutorial works for you. If you want the structured learning but don't want to go through university and things like that, if you don't think that that's super important, you can do an online boot camp. But generally speaking, I don't think you should have to pay any money to learn any programming language or learn any like machine learning or things like that. I would say, like, yeah, if you mentioned, like, if you're one of those people in like life science or law or anything, and yeah, AI is this big thing, so they want to learn more about AI and like maybe write a few AI applications, YouTube is your friend, right? Because you're not going to go and get a 4 year degree and cover all these different topics that don't really apply to AI just so you could, start coding in AI. So if you have something very narrow, that you want to do. Like I mentioned, like app development before. Like, hey, I just want to build like Android apps. Um, you can benefit a lot from you know targeted tutorials on like how do you do that in particular, and especially with AI and ML. But a lot of people don't realize that the kind of mindset you need for machine learning is a mathematical statistics sort of that approach to basically all the work that you do is it's like yeah you can learn Python for example because that is a language that you do that in but just knowing Python isn't enough. You have to be able to understand either intuitively or with a lot of explanation and understand like what is a gradient descent for example and being able to do calculus, not that you're hand solving formulas but having an understanding of what is a derivative, why is that important in this context. Matrix math is everywhere, linear algebra is everywhere, so matrix multiplications happen all the time, and filling matrices with zeros, having a zero matrix, doing things like that. So if you want to learn something, there's no reason why anyone can't just peek inside of it. Even as a developer, if I work in the back end all the time, for example, there's no reason I can't watch a YouTube video on front end development, right? And having that structured learning and going through school is really for people who either don't know the particular about what they want to do or just love it so much that they can do anything. I know people who they don't narrow their focus in development. If it's code, they'll do it, right? And so if you are someone who works in a different field, for example, a lawyer who wants to work on laws around technology, it would be really beneficial to take a programming course. And not necessarily you need to be an expert in writing machine learning programs and it's like lawyer by day, machine learning expert by night, but having an understanding on like, okay, what is this technology really about? What can you do? What can't you do? Even learning the theory. You can learn so much theory about machine learning without ever writing any code for it. And that would be beneficial as a lawyer trying to make laws around machine learning, right? And so you can get away with a lot without uh, necessarily having to go into the nitty gritty if you don't want your job to be the nitty gritty is really what I'm getting at. So yeah, to bring it sort of full circle, all the people you say, for example, people in life science or whatever, if they want to learn about this stuff, YouTube videos is my always my number one go-to because they're free. But if they want to like have a complete career change and they don't want to be a doctor anymore, they want to do robotics or something, then yeah, that's when you go for a whole course correction. But if you just want to say, I wonder how machine learning is going to help me as a doctor, well, then you can look into machine learning in particular, and then you can say, okay, what is machine learning? What are the different types of machine learning models? How do these models apply in the medical field and things like that? Like that's where it comes in.
Perfect. Wow. Honestly, I have a lot more questions, but I think we did go in a little bit of tangent. I think a lot of people also want to know about your career too. So you did mention you've been in IBM a few times. So could you just start with like the first time you got into them, or was that your first ever internship?
Yes, so I'll go through the background, I guess. I first joined IBM in 2018 for the months of July and August because I had just graduated high school in the month of June. So I
Oh wow.
actually joined IBM for 2 months as a high school intern before starting university. Um, when I started university, I was first year engineering at McMaster, and I did my first year. But during my second semester, I believe it was February in my first year, I got an email from HR that said, "Hey, your previous team liked you so much that they kind of wanted to invite you back." So my first internship was on IBM. We called it DSX, Data Science Experience. So IBM Data Science Experience Local. I was basically a technical writer. So I would, there was a lot of processes that were happening internal, like even simple things like how to install the product. But none of these processes were written down anywhere. So for those first 2 months, I essentially, followed a bunch of senior devs. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I documented all the process. Like I would make them teach me how to do whatever it is they were doing, and I would document everything. And then I would go back and reading my own documentation, try to do it again. And any error I run into, any problems I run into, I go back to them. I note that down, and then upload that. So I spent those first 2 months after graduating high school basically writing a lot of internal documentation for a lot of the really common processes that we had because they realized that hey, if we get a new hire tomorrow, we don't have anywhere to refer them to. We're gonna have to like take a senior dev off their project and be like, hey, teach this guy how to do everything. Um, so that's what I did for those first 2 months, and then after my first year, I went for a 4 month internship. Except now the product was rebranded a little bit. It was called a Watson Studio. So I was on Watson Studio logo, and there I wasn't doing technical writing. Instead, I was still doing like I guess more internal things. But the two big or say the three areas I focused on where the first one was security patching. So we had some code scans done by IBM, and they said, "Hey, there's all these things in your JavaScript code that you need to fix for your installer." And actually, I should probably clarify that was the specific squad I worked on was the install team. So we were responsible for making sure the product would get installed. And there were two ways of doing it. There was a front end way, like with a UI, and you can click buttons and do that. And there was also a command line way. So the two major things I did in those 4 months was I improved the security for the front end install because we did a code stand that said, here's all these problems, and I went in and fixed it. And the second major thing I did was that I actually automated the process for the command line install. Um, Actually, no, backwards. I automated the process for the web install. The command line
Okay.
install already had one. So for the web install, again, I talked a little bit before about Jenkins and BuildBot. Like we have these tools in place that will automatically run the install because it's just commands to run. So these bots in the background are just running these commands. But the web install, again, it's like a website with buttons to click and things like that. So you couldn't really just put those on those build platforms. So I had written, I believe it used Robot Framework. This is in 2019, so it's been a while. But I believe I used like Robot Framework to basically write a script that would automatically, wait the correct amount of time, click this button, fill in this data from there, so that you can put that script on any machine and it would gather the data from your machine required to run the install through the web UI. That was really fun. What happened after that internship, so we're 2 internships in, I did a student on call position for my entire second year. So during my second year, I was a materials engineering student, but at the same time, I was, on the side whenever I could, putting in hours at IBM. And I did that internship for the operations transformations team, which is basically an internal team at IBM that handled events like Take Our Kids to Work Day and things like that. So there's not really many stories there. And that takes us from fall of 2019 to summer of 2020 when I finished my second year. And I did an internship on IBM Consulting as a robotic process automation developer. So this is 4 internships in. Um, and robotic process automation, just RPA, was basically just automating processes, simply put. I don't really have too many stories about the work I did there, but I did learn a lot about automation overall. And so what I've found when to learn from that is I wouldn't call myself an expert in automation, but in the discussion around automation, I tend to know more than the other developers around me who haven't worked in automation, and I know all the key buzzwords like digital workers, future of work, blah blah blah. And then I did my third year of materials engineering, and at the end of that third year, I decided that I didn't want to do materials engineering, and I switched into mathematical science, which is the program I graduated with. And during the summer after my third year, I did an internship on DB2, which was their product. I believe it's called DB2 Warehouse now. It didn't really have a name when I joined, and just did some C++ backend work there, and nothing really too eventful there. But because I had switched into mathematical science, I realized I could graduate in like 4 courses. So I finished that internship up early, actually, so that I could finish my classes early. And I actually started working full time in January of 2021. So I've done 5 internships, and then I started January 2021 a full timer as a compiler developer working on IBM C++ compiler for AIX. And I graduated in May of 2021 because, again, I didn't really have any courses to do. So I managed to convince them, like, hey, can I just start working early? So I started full time in January 2021, graduated in May of 2021, and no, that's a lie. That was 2022. Sorry, January 2022 compiler, graduated in May 2022, and then here we are because 2021 was my internship. Sorry, it's kind of weird to keep track of the years,
Oh yeah,
but that is the
definitely.
very extensive story.
The reason I asked is because, as you mentioned earlier, that in your first job you learn so much that the stuff you learn in your first job is the stuff that you carry on in your career and stuff, right? But nowadays, I feel like it's so hard to even land that first job. So for you to do it like straight out of high school, right? Um, can you just talk about like what are some tips you would recommend for people in situations where they're trying to get their first internship, and even like obviously like it's hard to get a job nowadays than ever. Um, I feel like just employers need to take a chance on a student, or which they're not always inclined to do. So what is something students can do or like add to their resume or do anything to get that land that first job? Or if you were in their position, or yeah, if you were in their position, how would you do it?
For sure. So you can see, I've done like five internships. So like, yeah, the
Yeah.
interview process I think is the make or break. And that's the part where I noticed that's where people, I guess, need the most kind of guidance. Because just to touch on something you briefly said, was like, what can people put on their resume? Realistically, there's nothing you can put on your resume. A lot of people think like, oh, one simple trick to get everyone to want to interview you. It's like, no.
Oh,
Your
really? Oh, wow.
resume will simply just outline your resume. The best thing you can do to your resume is in your job, description and your bullet points for your positions. You talk about the impact you had as opposed to work you did. I've seen so many, people, because people ask me to resume review and they'll say, hey, I was a software developer at some company. What did I do? I wrote code to do this thing. I built a program that did that. I tested this. It's like, congratulations, you know what a software developer does, right? That's not
Yeah.
important, right? And so you need to talk about, like, for example, for my internship where I went into detail, the 2019 one where I worked on Watson Studio, those things that I told you about the security and then automating. The reason I remember that is because I put them on my resume and I put actual like measurable metrics alongside them. I said things like I reduced security vulnerabilities by 20%. And how did I do that? Well, there was some, JavaScript code changes I needed to make from a code scan, things like that. I increased testing capabilities by 100% because we had two ways of installing and we were only testing one. So I added a second, that's an increase of 100, right? And so having those kind of metrics, while it won't guarantee you a job or anything like that, it is the pretty much the only thing you can realistically do to stand out with a resume is to talk about the impact you had, to say, I improved this thing by that percent, as opposed to saying, yeah, I built some cool tool that everyone's using. Because your job as a developer is to build these things. But what's important is the kind of impact that you have on your team or on your product or on your customers as a result of the things that you do. In terms of the interview stage, obviously interviews can be very, nerve wracking. The reality is, if you have an interview, it's a positive sign. And while it's very easy to say just relax, realistically you should just relax. If they didn't like you, they wouldn't ask to interview you, right? I think a lot of people underestimate how big it is that you get an interview, right? A lot of people think like, oh, I got an interview, that's great, but like, what if I say the wrong thing? Like, that's not what they're looking for in the interview. The reason they have interviews is because anybody can say anything on their resume, right? I can go on my resume, I can say I'm the CEO of Google, and unless you know who the CEO of Google is, why wouldn't you believe me, right? And so the whole point of the interview is to say, okay, let's get on a call with this person. Let's go through the resume, maybe make them talk about some of the bullet points that they mentioned. Let's see, you might say on your resume, yeah, I wrote this cool AI from scratch that not even Google can replicate. Okay, well, why don't we get on a call? We'll ask you some questions about AI, see if you can answer them, right? Let's see. Okay, you talked about this experience. That looks really cool. Let's ask more about that. That's actually very interesting. I want to learn more about how you did this in robotics class and got an award or whatever the case, right? And so the interview really is just like almost like a code smell. It's to validate that you are who you say you are. And the biggest advice I can give for people doing interviews is don't make it an interview, make it a conversation, right? It very much, an interview should not really be much different from this interview we're doing right now, this podcast episode we're doing right now, where you're asking questions. You can see I'm not nervous, I'm not shaking. What if I say the wrong thing? I'm going on very long-winded answers, right? Like, this is very much a normal interview, except I answer the questions much shorter than this. But this is very much how an interview should be. It's a conversation, because when you get off of this call, if you were trying to hire for a team, you'd say, wow, okay, Michael is going to be a really great fit for this team because he just integrated so well during this call. He just worked out perfectly, right? And one of the examples I can give is when I did my interview for the DB2 team. One question I was asked was like, what's your favorite piece of software? What's your least favorite piece of software and why? Right. And so that's its own thing on its own. I can dive into like what are the best ways to answer that question, whatever the case. But I mentioned, oh, one software I really hate is Teams, Microsoft Teams. And of course, this was 2021. Teams was at the peak. Everyone's using it, right? So I say I hate Microsoft Teams. And then the interviewer says, oh, my wife has to use Microsoft Teams for work. She hates it, right? And I say, can you tell me about it, right? Like that's absolutely it's a ridiculous software. And I go into and I say, if you ask your wife, I guarantee she'll complain about these very same things. And I started listing all the things I hated about Teams, and so it's very conversational. And that's an example
That's
of like
fair.
the interviewer sort of initiated that by saying my wife, right? But the idea is that I shouldn't, I see that opportunity. And I don't just sit there and be like, okay, cool. Anyway, it's like, wow, she hates it too. I ask her about what I'm about to say, see if she agrees with any of these points, right? It's very much a conversation to be had, and to have this structure of like they're gonna put me in a corner and ask me a million questions, and like that's not what an interview is at all. And the whole point of the interview is to do two things, right? If I could summarize all, the whole point of the interview is to do two things. One is to verify you are who you say you are. Yes, you did do 4 month internship at Cineplex and whatever the case. And two, validate what you or let's say like assess what it is that you know, and anything you don't know, do we believe that this person can learn it, especially as an intern, as a student. I started at the very beginning. I talked about build tools, Jenkins, BuildBot, Kubernetes. There's all these massive tools that are used all over the place in industry that as a student, there is no reason you should have any experience working with these tools, right? And so it would be highly impractical for me to say, okay, guys, we need to hire an intern that starts in May. We're going to find interns that have Kubernetes experience and Jenkins experience. And it's like, what? Right? They're not going to have that. There's no way any course would allow you to use these kind of tools. These are the kind of tools you use in production environments. And so when I go interviewing for some intern, I'm not saying, okay, what is your experience of Jenkins? I'm asking myself, is this someone that is capable of learning Jenkins over the course of this internship? Right? And so you need to show that whatever you know well, and whatever you don't know, you're willing to learn, right? And you have an adeptness to learning, and you want to learn it. It's interesting to you. It'll come to you quickly. You have the capability to learn, and that overall is what you want to highlight. It's like, yeah, it's great if you know all these different things, but if you don't know it, and I don't think you can learn it, then you're definitely not getting the job. And if you don't know it, but I feel like given a little push, you can become an expert in this thing, basically, then yeah, I'll give it a shot. Because no one's expecting an intern to just know these things, right? No one's expecting an intern to know the ins and outs of compilers, for example, which is what I'm working on right now. No one's expecting an intern to know the specifics on certain programming languages and how does the C compiler handle. Tell me about the preprocessor, and there's only so much you can do when your classes are just telling you, data structures and algorithms, right? So the thing to highlight, again, for a resume, there's not much to do there, but make it clean, make it one page, no fluff, because believe me, the more you add does not make it a better resume. They're skimming through it. You get straight to the point. They're not going to read your whole life story on a resume. So a short one page resume, straight to the point. It doesn't have to fill the full page. That's fine. But the interview stage is really where you want to stand out. That's where you want to show you integrate very easily with the team because it's a conversation. You know what you know. You can verify all the experiences you put in your resume. Everything you don't know, you're willing to learn. You want to learn. And I'll close this off by saying one of the most powerful things you can do in an interview is at the end when they say, "Do you have any questions for me?" Yes, you do have questions for them. And one of the big questions you can ask is, if I were to get this job offer and I were to join this team, what skills do you think I should develop between now and my start date to be better at the job from day one? Right? That's a really great question that I love to ask. Is, hey, if I were to get this job, and congratulations, I get picked, yay, and I start some date. What can I learn from today to the starting date that'll let me off with the races? I'll be good from day one. Right? Obviously, you can't be perfect from day one, but in that waiting period between you getting the offer and when you start, what should I do in the meantime to better prepare myself for the role? Right? And so you're already making them think about you in the position. They're already comparing you as you stand in front of them to the kind of person that they want to see in this job, and back and forth. And that is what you want to highlight in an interview. It's not, oh my gosh, I'm going to freak out and fail. They like you. If they didn't like you, they wouldn't ask you to interview, right? And so now that you're here, Make them like you even more. Be honest, right? Because if you fake it in the interview, you're gonna have to fake it for the rest of the job. So,
Fair. Okay, so I can definitely understand why you're so well at getting jobs because honestly, it must be so fun having an interview with you because not only are you able to like describe things really well, there's certain times even right now like you've used technical terms that I didn't know, but you took the time to like explain them right after and you used an example, which honestly astonishing. So I would like to ask
thank
like
you.
something about more about the job now. So like say if you pass all the technical things and now you actually finally get the job, because you do work with interns, what makes a person a good intern? Like what can they do to like come back? Like you mentioned for your first time that you were working on a project and then oh sorry, can you
Sorry,
hear
you
me?
froze for a sec, but you're back. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what did you hear last?
You asked what makes someone a good intern.
Okay, perfect. So the reason I asked you is because you said your first project, your first internship, you were working on a project, and what you did is take the initiative to ask the senior developers and questions about what they're doing, took notes, went back, and like kept that in the loop, like going back and forth. From my perspective, that does show initiative, and I was like, okay, like this person is willing to learn. So I'm guessing you recommend that too, but is there anything else they can do to like get like a good status and like be as lucky as you and like get that email from HR and be like, we want you back. So like, what would you recommend?
The biggest piece of advice I have applies whether you're an intern or new to a team. Whether you're new to a team because you're a new hire or you just transferred, whatever the case, is ask a lot of questions. Ask people for help. Annoy them with your questions. Not literally where it's like I don't know how to run a single command, but you want to get help as quickly as possible. You want to bug people for help and ask questions along that regard. The way I can sort of try to make an analogy to it is do you have any younger siblings by chance?
I do. I have one, yeah.
Okay, how old are they?
I think they're in
Or
grade
like
10.
what grade? Grade
They're in
10.
grade 10,
Okay.
yeah.
Have they ever asked you for help with schoolwork?
Yes.
Okay. How does it feel to help them?
It feels fun, but also can be annoying after a while. Like if it's like a very simple question, but I'm guessing you're trying to say like it's fun for me to teach them, right? Yes,
Right.
it definitely is. It definitely is.
And not only is it fun for you, but I want you to imagine if this hasn't happened already, you're in the middle of doing a school assignment and you're looking at this one question and you cannot figure it out for the life of you. And then your sibling comes in and they say, "Hey, can you help me with this math problem?" And then you sit down with them, you teach them that problem, and then they're on their way, right? You were frustrated, but now you feel a little better because, maybe I'm not an idiot because I can teach
Oh,
something,
you know what? That's
right?
true.
and
That
and
is true.
and that happens in the workplace all the time. You are going to be stuck on a problem, and you asking for people for help. Like we like to treat these people like they're masters. They're like gods of programming, but they're also stuck on a problem when you come to bug them. And it feels nice to help people because it validates. Like, yeah, maybe I'm not stupid, right?
That's so true. Yeah. Whenever no, that actually makes so much more sense. Yeah, because whenever I do help him, because he is younger than me, the topics he learns is something I'd have such like I've obviously understood a lot better. So the way you explain it does like reinsure you that you are like obviously a smart person. So yeah, I guess so. Now if you go back to your problem, you have a better mindset. Ah, see, okay, so
Right.
I get okay. See, that's weird because for me, it's like I do like to ask people for help, but then do you ever feel like you're asking a dumb question? If that makes sense? Like you don't want to make them perceive you as like an incompetent person, so now they don't like they're like, oh, we didn't hire the right guy. If that makes sense.
The problem with asking dumb questions is that the only people who can assess whether it's a dumb question are the people who have the answer, right? And
Oh,
that's the thing is because we all think all of our questions are dumb. The especially and the one thing I don't like about the way school is structured and the way like software and computer science programs are structured is it makes you feel like if you have a question you're an idiot, right? But the reality is you can't know things unless you first ask about it. And especially in the workplace, there's no assignment that says, okay, do question 1 through 5. Literally, the only way you can know anything at all is if you ask someone and they tell you. A good example is when I was on my DB2 internship. I was given a problem and I was stuck on it for a couple of days where I literally made like no progress. And so I got on this call with this one senior developer, and he said, "Okay, let me walk you through how I would do this problem, so you can get a better idea of like, how do you approach the problems that we give you." And then he said, "Okay, first things first, you have to build DB2." That's right. There's no reason you should know how to do that. Let me show you how to build DB2. Okay, we built DB2. Now we need to be able to run certain test cases. That's right. There's no reason you should know how to run those test cases. Let me walk you through that. Now that we've done that, we need to go to the part of the code that's a problem. That's right. There's no way you would know which part of the code is problematic. Let me show you how. So a lot of the time, people are sitting around like, "Oh, I'm such an idiot. I don't know this." But why would you know it is the question. There's no
Yeah,
reason you
fair.
should know the things that these people with 10 years of experience know because they've been doing it for 10 years. They've been doing it for so long, right? And these people, they have like 13, 15 years of experience. And they're like, all right, build DB2. It's like, yeah, that's a simple command for you, but I've never worked with DB2. Why would I know how to build DB2, right? And so
Yeah,
that's the thing that at least good developers as well, like senior people will realize is like, yeah, there is a line of this is simple for me, but for someone that's never done it, you shouldn't expect them to do it, right? And as a new person, you can ask a lot of questions, and yeah, you might feel like, oh, this is silly, but no one's gonna say this guy is stupid. He asked a bunch of questions, right? That doesn't happen
okay.
because when you ask a question, someone gives you the answer. Guess what? Now you know the answer, right? And so if you take that, ask questions to different people in different areas, now you become this person that just knows all this different stuff from all these different areas, right? And that's what it boils down to is the only way you can gain knowledge in the workplace is by asking questions about it. Because we've talked, for example, I mentioned Jenkins a million times in this call,
Yeah.
and I'm going to guess you've never worked with Jenkins.
No.
So if I was on a QA team, like a team that was responsible for, making sure all of our products work with all the changes, it builds, all that stuff, and you're the new intern, and I say, hey, I need you to make a new pipeline for the Jenkins builders, that wasn't even an English sentence to you, right? It's like, what did you just say? What is a pipeline? How do I work with Jenkins? How do I spawn my own instance? You don't know these things. And so I can't call you an idiot for not knowing these things because school doesn't teach you these things. So if you didn't learn it in school and you're not learning it at work, where are you learning it? You're not, right? And
Fair.
so yeah, like I understand, believe me, because I've done five, being on six different teams, and now joining my second, at the end of next week, my seventh team. Being new on a team, I always have to be that person that asks a million questions. But the reality is, if you don't know, you're not going to know it. Especially because a lot of teams have a lot of internal processes for how you do things, and because it is internal to that team, the only people who know how to do it are the people on that team. And
On
if you're not on that team, how are you supposed to know, right? So
fair, fair. Um, so sorry, how long can you still stay? Because it has
I can
already
keep
been
going.
an hour.
I
Okay,
know I talk a lot, so like
no,
however
no,
much
I
time you
love it
need.
though. I love it. It's so much fun talking to you. You have the ability.
Thank
I'm
you.
surprised you don't have like your own podcast or anything, because you do seem like you're enthusiastic, like having conversations with people. I won't keep you on for too long because I don't want this episode to be long as well. Let me ask you one last question.
Yeah,
Uh, Now that the whole idea of AI and stuff is like emerging into the industry, a lot of people are afraid like their jobs are going because AI can like we have like ChatGPT can already write code if you ask it, right? And
yeah.
it can write pretty well code, like at least from my experience. So I want to ask what your opinion is on that. Like, do you think AI is like a danger to your career and other people's career? Or, and sorry, and I also want to ask, like, how can people leverage ChatGPT to benefit them in your type of industry?
Absolutely. So to answer the first question is it a danger to my career and others? Yes and no. I will say this is the area where I see a lot of people get it wrong, and I'm very cautious on the yes part of that yes and no. And I mentioned before, I did that internship as a robotic process automation developer, really large title, RPA developer, and having that automation insight allows me to, in my opinion, answer this question much better than most who've never worked with automation. So there is a specific term for the combination of automation and artificial intelligence. It's called hyper automation. And the thing about hyper automation is that way before AI was this big centerpiece because of Chat GPT, this is something people have talked about for years. They said, okay, yeah, in the next 5 years, hyper automation is on the rise, da da da, right? Because right now, when you automate a task, let's say I'm going to automate sending a message on LinkedIn, right? That task is very dependent on the LinkedIn UI not changing, right? Because it's a click this button, click that button, type this message here, hit send. But if LinkedIn just changes any one of those buttons you click to do something else, your whole process fails, right?
Yeah.
And so hyper automation, right, including AI, maybe you can use AI to figure out what changed and click the appropriate thing, for example. Or like if you're using automation to read a document and grab all this information out of the document in a very specific way, maybe the document can come in different forms and the out, like maybe instead of name it says what is your title, and right, and be able to use AI to say, hey, that basically means the same thing, use that as the name field, right? And so these are really weird examples, but what the point I'm trying to get at is it all builds to this idea of a digital worker, right? And digital workers are designed to help people specialize, right? So yes, there are jobs that will be replaced by automation and AI. I won't say AI in particular because just having a bot doesn't do anything. You need to automate what this bot's inputs and outputs will be, right? So for example, driving a truck, a self-driving truck, right? That is not just AI driving, it's automation and AI working together to drive a truck. And so, yeah, there are jobs that will be replaced by AI, and there's no denying that. But it's not that people are going to be super displaced and now everyone's going to be out of a job and there's never going to be any truck drivers ever. Kind of the idea is it takes from jobs that are very, let's call it like menial tasks, very repetitive tasks. And if that's the only thing that you're doing, that job should be replaced. But there are a lot of people where doing something heavily repetitive, for example, like at the end of a week approving some, some invites from managers or whatever, where if that's just part of your job, automating that task frees up your time to let you do other things, right? And so the push for automation and AI has always been freeing up your time from having to do very simple, very repetitive tasks so you can focus on the other things. But some people's tasks are just inherently very repetitive, right? But you can imagine, for example, in the short term, let's say you're a factory worker, right? Because you can see like in cars and stuff like that, they already have robots that, put the car pieces together.
Yeah.
So let's say you work in the assembly line, right? In the short term, yeah, you're going to lose your job because we're going to build a bot that'll automatically put these pieces together. But now you can ask yourself, what can I do outside of working in the assembly line, right? And it is a tough situation to sort of be in where you have to lose your job because of that. But I think, in my opinion, if you have a very repetitive job, it gives you the opportunity to say, what skills do I want to focus on? What do I actually want to do in the long term, right? Especially because we see now the economy doesn't really work well for these kind of people working at, let's say, McDonald's or working in the
Yeah.
factory and things like that. There used to be a time where you could get an entire house and a car and go on family vacations every year working at a gas station, right? That in like the
Yeah.
60s and 70s, and so you could do that. Now you can't. So you are freeing up your time to be able to say, okay, what specialized skill do I actually want to do? Because these specialized skills are not going to replace you. That's the first bit of it. And the second bit of it, you mentioned like, yeah, Chat GPT can write code. Not as well as you might think, though, right? And the problem you
Oh,
have with Chat GPT and all these large language models in general is their output is not inherently verifiable, right? And I was having this conversation with some people because they're getting into like prompt engineering and all this other kind of stuff. I've asked ChatGPT to write, for example, hey, write a Discord bot that will send a message every day at this hour. And it'll write what is, for the most part, really good, code that would, for the most part, work if it didn't just randomly make up functions that don't exist in the API or just make up a route to the API that doesn't exist and say, yeah, this is the base for it. Like, it doesn't know anything is the real problem. ChatGPT doesn't know what it's saying, and it can't write code and say, yes, this will compile. It doesn't know that. It's just based on the data and that was provided and everything it learned. Chances are that when you say this thing, the mathematically most probable thing to say next would be, int main zero, whatever the case, things like that, right? And so where it comes in terms of like you and I as a developer, for example, is that it's a very good tool to allow you to work more efficiently. That's always been the goal with hyper automation. Is, yeah, there are some very repetitive jobs that are going to be replaced. But if your job just has a repetitive component to it, then we can ease that workload off to a bot and you can get, the other stuff done. So for example, I know some really incredible developers that will still ask GPT stuff for development, right? If I wanted to build a Discord bot that sent a message every day at noon, I could write it from scratch, or I could ask ChatGPT to write it, see that the bot fails because it's too complex for ChatGPT to get on the first try, and say, okay, I know what went wrong. This function doesn't exist. What is the proper way to actually implement this feature? And sort of go from there. So it's good in that you can use it to provide a good baseline, a good starting point. I don't know regex that well. It's one of the things I want to learn, but regex has so many different standards that it's hard to like, what is the standard I want to learn? But I might say to ChatGPT recently, I said, okay, here is some, like regex that's not working correctly. What is a way I could write this for Python? Because Python uses a different regex standard than JavaScript, which uses a different standard than the sed command that's built into Linux, right? And so I said, here's a Linux sed command that uses regex to capture some group and do something. How would I write this in Python's regex, right? And I can sort of take it and go from there. Oh, did that work? Great. Did it not work? Why didn't it work? What is it missing? What's the difference? Da, da, da. And so it's not going to replace developers. Definitely not. Because even if you could have a bot that would just write perfect code and run it, you still need people to assess the code, to test the code, to add features the exact way that you want it, right? How do you explain to ChatGPT that I want to be able to add a button that includes this feature to do that thing, and it needs to be able to calculate this and do, right, and have a performance standard of that? It's like you can't really. So all of this to say, people like to overhype what AI is capable of doing. They always have, right? And AI, I believe, is going to be really advanced as, of course, as time goes on. But there are hard limitations to what AI can do that people need to be aware of. At the end of the day, no matter how impressive ChatGPT is, and it is very impressive, it cannot think, meaning it does not know what it is saying because it cannot know anything. You are giving it a sentence. It is passing that sentence into, of course, the model, which says, based on all the data I have, when somebody says these exact words in this exact order, the most probabilistic thing to respond with would be this sentence. And so it responds with that sentence. And so the thing that you can highlight from ChatGPT, for example, to close that off, is not, wow, look how impressive, and how much knowledge this thing has, which, of course, you can say it is impressive, but rather, look how much you can get away with without being able to think. You can have an
That's
entire conversation with ChatGPT, but ChatGPT doesn't think. I once told ChatGPT, it's like, hey, I'm in love with a frog. What do I do? And it'll say things like, well, humans and frogs are very different. I suggest that you find a human relationship, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't know what a frog is. It
yeah.
doesn't know who I
Oh, I
am. It
see.
doesn't know anything, but it's able to have a conversation with me without being able to know or think or do anything. It just looks at what I say and says, from a probability standpoint, this is what should be said next.
Sure.
That is all it's doing. It
Damn.
can't have
Okay.
an opinion. It can't say this is right or wrong. It just says, because you said this thing, from a probability standpoint, this is the next thing that should be said. That's all it's doing.
That's a see. Oh, damn. Okay. I'm gonna ask you one more question, but
Yeah.
if it's
I'll keep
possible,
it
can you
short.
just like answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, please answer it within like a minute or two.
Yeah.
Because you say that, ChatGPT has actually passed the bar and like did pretty well on like the MCAT and stuff. And like my question kind of becomes like, if you give it a good enough prompt, do you think you could do you think it's fake could it fake it to a point where it basically looks like to the user that it is thinking?
Absolutely. The problem is, well, I guess to the user, what the user's thinking is a bit relative, but to keep it short, the problem is that you cannot consistently come up with a prompt to do that, right? And
Oh,
that's
okay.
what that comes to what I said before about you can't verify the output. You can ask it, solve this math equation, and it'll solve it, but it'll be wrong. And then you can say, hey, can you give me the steps? And maybe it'll be right, maybe it'll still be wrong, right? And
Oh,
that's
okay.
the big thing. And you asked me a little earlier, and I will keep it short, I swear. But you asked me
Yes.
a little earlier, like what kind of things can you do with ChatGPT? Whatever you want. But from a production standpoint, you should never have your output to a customer, whatever it is you do, be reliant purely on AI because you cannot verify anything it is saying. You can say, "Hey, ChatGPT, how do I lose weight?" And it'll say, "Okay, you need to eat 10 chocolate bars a day." It's that's not realistic, right? And
Yeah,
because but you need someone to verify that says, hey, maybe it shouldn't tell people to eat 10 chocolate bars a day. And so yeah, you can come up with really cool realistic prompts, but you can't verifiably say prompt it this way every single time and you will always get a really good at like no, you can't do
fair,
that.
fair. Well, thank you so much. I personally learned a lot from you, especially from because you were able to share a lot of good information and make it really simple to a beginner like me. And I'm guessing everyone's watching who they have also learned a lot. To end it off, like, is there anything you would like to say before we end it off?
Yeah, I'd say for one, thank you for this very long episode. I know I kind of rambled and rambled today. Um, I think it's really the field of software really is vast, and I will say a lot of people getting into it. I see it all the time. Actually, a lot of people think, "Oh, I'm so stupid. I don't know this." Da, da, da. Software is ever changing, and as time goes on, there's more and more stuff being added to the stack. Even the experts that you look at and you say, wow, this person's so smart, they don't know as much as you think they do. And not to say that they're stupid, but if they're stupid, everyone's stupid, is sort of the thing I'm going for. So it's okay to feel dumb. In software, that's part of the job. Find what you like doing, do it well, and study best practices, all those kind of things. But stop comparing yourself to other people because no matter how good you've got it, no matter how smart you are, I guarantee we can find someone smarter very quickly at that, right? And there's too much to know everything. So
That's fair.
focus on what you like, get good at those things, be the master of that. Don't focus on what does someone else know? Because if you could do it all, you wouldn't need a team. But look around you. Every product has a team of people and all their small little experts who know that thing very well. Right. So focus on doing the things you're interested in. Stop comparing yourself to others and just have a good time because being in software is unironically a lifelong learning experience.
Oh, fair enough. Well, thank you so much for that great speech at the end. Um, yeah, no, like I really appreciate you doing this. This was something I was really excited for. I'm glad it turned out better than I expected, actually. But thanks again. I really appreciate this, and I hope we could do this again someday.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe in the near future, because you seem like an interesting person. So,
Thank you.
other than that, yeah, I think that's all, and we'll see you guys again for another episode.
Sounds
If
good.
you
Thank
have,
you very much, everyone. Thank you.
perfect. You have the recording, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna end the recording. Once it's uploaded, I'll send it to you.
All right, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate this.
Anytime. Thank you very much.
Is there anything else I have to do on my end for the recording or?
I don't know what format you'll get it in. So actually, let me end the recording right now. Separate recording file will be created.